and it is 35. So let's get started. Welcome everybody. And I just wanted to pose a general question. Where are you guys all coming from? Like, what part of the world are you from? Toronto, awesome. Nice. San Diego, Sonoran Desert, fantastic. SFV right here. 818 represent. All right. Yeah, it's lovely to see folks coming in from a bunch of different locations. Santa Fe, New Mexico, awesome. And yeah, like, regenerative gardening principles can really be applied anywhere, but like understanding your context is super important, and you have to sort of like adjust to like, your local climate regimes, native ecologies, and even like the social context and whatnot. And like how I approach this is like, I don't advocate for like a specific ideology or methodology when it comes to gardening practices or regenerative gardening. I just use regenerative gardening as sort of like an umbrella term to describe gardening practices that emulate life processes and are more like restorative and have the potential to reverse a lot of the damage that has been caused to our home planet by this society that we live in. But that's why I titled this course Cultivating Life, because that's what we're really doing as regenerative gardeners. We're seeking to be team players. We're seeking to establish a relationship of partnership and mutual aid with the living world around us. That's really what it's all about. Honestly, like, not much more than that. And of course, like, your social context is important. Your ecological context is important. Your cultural context is important. And these things all play in. But like the guiding value is this partnership ethic, as one of my favorite philosophers, ecofeminist author, Carolyn Merchant likes to call it, the idea of partnership with the world of life. That we're sort of like on an even playing field with the rest of the world of life. We're not its conquerors, we're not its dominators, but we're just here as a part of it and here to help out. So I want to begin on that note because we are going to get into some of the issues. So here's the table of contents for the presentation. I want to talk briefly about like the food crisis that we're facing, and how like it's really been produced by like our industrial system of agriculture, and how like sort of those paradigms and norms from the industrial system of agriculture have been like sort of like replicated and internalized in the way that we garden, and like what sort of like gardening methodologies and practices are sort of commonplace in our society. And like, I think everything that we do and like, honestly, the way that we operate and think has to do with like the context in which, we are born and raised and we grow up and in which we are immersed on a day-to-day basis. And, of course, the way that we garden is no exception to that. So we'll be talking a bit about how consumerism and like fossil fuel-based agriculture is infiltrating, our gardening practices. Then I want to introduce some of the concepts about the concepts of like, how living systems operate and how living systems grow themselves and reproduce, and then how living systems build soil and create the conditions for more life. So we'll talk a bit about that and how those things can apply to our gardens. And then I'm going to go into like how the course itself is going to work. So we can begin. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself really briefly. Many of you guys know me as the Solarpunk farmer. My name is also Andreas. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to offer this course to you all. So I've been gardening for 11 years. And, when I first started gardening, I was the guy, I will admit, I'm happy to admit this because, we all learn, from our experiences and from what we do. Like, I was the guy who was dumping chemical fertilizers on my banana plants when I first started out, because it was growing bananas that really made me passionate about gardening in the first place, because they're just so much fun to grow. But, I was, sort of told these bad ideas starting off. Like, I was on the bananas.org forums and people are saying, oh yeah, you need to use chemicals to grow bananas, blah, blah, blah. They're too heavy feeders, like this and that, like sort of these bad ideas that you might hear when it comes to like many vegetables. Oh, like you have to pour all this fertilizer on corn, it's a heavy feeder, you it's hard to grow this organically or whatever, like even organically. There are many issues with the idea of organic gardening to begin with, and like how that's been like sort of how that's come to be. So I've been gardening for 11 years. I have, gardened with chemicals, the synthetics. I've gardened with organic inputs. I've, gardened with hydroponics, aquaponics. I'm sure you guys have seen some of my aquaponics related posts. I love aquaponics, but that's not what this course is about. And I think aquaponics is more of like a technology that is applicable to like a certain place and certain time. But, I'll be teaching about aquaponics in the future, of course. And so I have a bachelor's in environmental science with a minor in sustainability, and I did take a PDC, permaculture design course. And what I do for work is I'm a site manager and program administrator at this amazing food garden at this university locally here. I got to say, I love what I do, but it doesn't pay. And that's one of the reasons why, like, I'm teaching this course, but, still offering it at an affordable price, sort of like a way for you guys to get knowledge, while also, giving me the means to support myself and my son and create a better livelihood for ourselves, I'm also a certified UC Master Gardener, but, I'm certainly not acting as one here. Like, the way that UC Master Gardeners operates, at least in my county, is extremely traditional. Like, a lot of the stuff that I'll be discussing here and sharing with you all is, not even on the books at all. And I've worked all sorts of places. I've worked at nonprofits, small farms, urban gardens, and food desert communities, and with various research institutions. I worked with my alma mater, Santa Clara University, doing research into a home gardening program at one of the local nonprofits there. I've worked at Mend, Meat Eating with Dignity. That's actually how I got into this, is by working at Mend and being involved in their home garden program. It really inspired me and showed me that urban gardening can be very transformative for people. And I've also, the institution I work with now does a lot of research through the garden that I manage. And I also like environmental and political philosophy. I mentioned Carolyn Merchant. There are a couple other names I like that you'll see in this presentation. But yeah, and I will stop to answer questions, not to worry all. This info session is about just like putting everything into context and perspective, and just like sort of introducing the idea of regenerative gardening, like what it is, and like sort of like what some of the major forces and processes that we're working with in regenerative gardening are. I want to give you enough information to where, you can decide to explore this on your own. If, you decide that this course and the format and the fee and everything is not right for you, and that's totally okay. Like, I encourage you to do your own research, and I'm always happy to like provide you with the resources to do that. If you want to do that, I've done most of my own research. I've studied, I've practiced, I've done all this for quite some time. And I want to make my knowledge and like my pedagogical, experience available to you, because I do teach this stuff in a professional and academic setting. But this info session is really just to introduce you to a lot of the ideas and give you a starting point, whether you want to take the course or, whether you want to explore resources on your own. And I will have a list of free resources at the end of the presentation. But we're really focusing on vegetable gardening in this course. But with consideration for and partnership with native ecologies. I'm going to be talking about how certain native plants can be incorporated into our vegetable gardens. And maybe there are some that even may make good crops, for example. I'm going to be sticking to ones that are well known that you could Google and find out that it's edible, because I don't want to share ethnobotanical information that it's not my place to share as a white person. But I will be telling you about certain things like, that I've observed and that I've done in the gardens that I've managed. We'll be talking a bit about native ecologies too, because that is a part of it. If we're not promoting native ecologies, then we're not doing anything regenerative, right? I'll stop to answer questions really quick. Quote unquote miner's lettuce, exactly. That's the thing. Like that name is so colonial, isn't it? I've heard alternate names for it. Like I've heard it be called like winter purslane. And I normally just call it like Claytonian, but even that, like it's when you look into the etymology of these words, like, you can see, it's very colonial oftentimes. But yeah, financial barriers are a huge accessibility issue. And like, that's the thing. I can't be Solarpunk if I'm charging you up the ass for these classes. I can't do that. Like, that's not what Solarpunk is about. And really what Solarpunk is about is creating the conditions for a just, inclusive, and ecologically harmonious society that like is based off of both like, a revitalization of traditional wisdom and traditional ecological knowledge, but also like, what we can glean from like our industrial capitalist society so far. Like, what good has come out of it? Like, maybe we can make use of that. And like sort of, the scientific revolution, like what part of that actually does have value, and how can that sort of like be recontextualized and couched in like an ethic and a mindset and a philosophy that is actually liberatory and anti-oppressive. That's kind of what Solarpunk's about. And of course, there's the aesthetic. Solarpunk is like associated with sort of this post-apocalyptic, ultra sustainable society aesthetic. And if you look at Solarpunk, the Solarpunk hashtag on Instagram, you can find some amazing art. That's what, really, that's what was my entry point, was like seeing the art. And my friend from the rave scene, Carla, first introduced me to it a couple of years ago. But yeah, so Solarpunk is sort of like all about cultivating, a new society that is allows for the liberation of all life forms, but also like sort of capitalizes on what we can do as humans to make Earth more abundant than it ever was before. So yeah, that's how I define Solarpunk. So we'll talk briefly about the food crisis, and I'm sure you all are very aware of like what's going on. So I don't want to like get into this too much, but I feel like it's important to talk about it briefly just to put things into context. And this is a quote from Bookchain. I really love Bookchain's essay, Radical Agriculture. Talks about sort of like the history of agriculture as it's developed and how it's emerged, and sort of like how our social attitudes have impacted the way that we go about growing our food. A really great essay on that. But sort of like, this is where we're at. Like, agriculture nowadays is not about food. It's about profit. It's about taking more than you get. That's what profit is, right? It's taking more than you give. And pocketing that difference. So, and that's why it's become like so industrial, right? That's why, it's become this operation where everything is mechanized and simplified, and the nuances and complexities of the world of life around us are sort of like bulldozed over, right? And that's exactly how it starts. Like, and this is what I like to call the vicious cycle of fossil agriculture, because that's really what it is it not? It's a system of agriculture that is basically run on fossil fuels. That's it. So if you want to clear massive amounts of land to establish one of these industrial farms, good luck doing that without chainsaws and bulldozers and all this machinery that came about thanks to fossil fuels. And it's the expropriation of land. A political philosopher who I really like, who talks a lot about the expropriation of nature, and expropriation just means literally the taking of nature. It's theft, it's robbery, right? Is John Bellamy Foster. And John Bellamy Foster is an eco-Marxist, sort of like one of the newer schools of like environmental Marxism. So I definitely would recommend, if you're into the philosophy side of things, reading some of John Bellamy Foster's essays on the Monthly Review magazine website, and maybe listening to some of his lectures and talks on YouTube. Really good stuff. And again, I draw from a lot of different perspectives here. I don't advocate for like a single, school of thought or mode of practice or whatever, because everything ultimately has sort of like its advantages and disadvantages, and like the good things with it and the problems with it. So that's really how it starts, is habitat destruction, and land is cleared and ecosystems are destroyed to essentially be paved over and turned into these monocultures, these plantings of a single crop. And in order to sustain these monocultures, the soil has to be tilled to kill all the weeds. You have to have this massive fossil fuel guzzling machinery in order to do that in the first place, in a way that minimizes labor costs, because that's really what the system is about. Minimizing the human labor input and maximizing the output as in yields. This destroys the soil. This absolutely destroys the soil. And in order to maintain yields at this point, you basically have to dump more fossil fuels onto the soil. So what you see right here, I'm going to turn on my pointer. This is a tanker of anhydrous ammonia. And anhydrous ammonia which is basically cleaner, right? It's like what you use to clean your floor is poured onto the soil. And, because it contains nitrogen, it produces a rapid growth response in plants, but it also kills off of the mycorrhizal fungi and the worms and the little arthropods, the little bugs, and a lot of the other beneficial organisms in the soil. And at that point, only really the bacteria can survive. And at the end of it, you get weak plants. You get super weak plants that are dedicating all of their energy to growth and not energy into their chemical defenses, their immune system, and their nutrient content, their nutrient density. And so what you end up with is weak plants that are growing in this massive field, right? And it's a big dinner menu sign for pests. And also for weeds too, because when weeds see this situation, we'll talk a bit about the role of weeds during the course, because weeds are so maligned. They're so maligned, and honestly, unjustly so. And I'm not talking about invasive plants. I'm talking about weeds in general. The plants that you see in your garden just popping up, or plants that are called agricultural weeds. There's a reason why these plants are here. And this system creates the conditions for those plants because it's the job of those plants to actually begin regenerating the ecosystem. But to deal with these pests and these weeds that are really trying to get rid of this inefficient system, because nature desires efficiency, at least the efficiency of capture and storage of energy. This is not efficient from that perspective. So of course, more fossil fuels in the form of poisons are applied to the land, which basically sterilizes it even more. And it's just horrible for the environment and horrible for our watersheds, horrible for the soil, horrible for the climate, horrible for our bodies when we eat this food. It's just no good. And so the way that I see it is in this system, humans are no longer stewards of the land. We're no longer taking care of the land. We're no longer partners, in this food system, humans, and I don't want to say all humans in general, because of course, farmers are only 2% of the population of the United States, at least. And I don't want to say all humans are responsible for this. That's a very unjust position to take, of course. It's really the minority of humans who are perpetuating these institutions that have created the conditions for this kind of agriculture, right? But it's caused agriculture to become an endeavor that destroys land, right? That degrades ecosystems, and essentially converts these abundant habitats and these places of abundance and life into wastelands, and on the economic side of things, a farmer is no longer as much a producer as they are a consumer of fossil fuel inputs and corporate machinery. This is a corporate fossil fuel driven system of agriculture. So I just want to talk very briefly about what I feel are the four major problems associated with the system of agriculture. So climate change, of course, this system contributes to climate change. And of course, when it comes to that, and when it comes to all of these things, this is creating the conditions for the collapse of the system, right? Because when biodiversity collapses, pests are going to become more of a problem. When climate change spirals out of control and you have this system that is really not resilient and really doesn't have the diversity and complexity of plant life and soil life that is required to weather extreme climate and weather conditions, then it creates the conditions for its own destruction and soil degradation too. As the topsoil continues to become degraded and erode, it's going to be harder and harder to grow food in it. And as this happens, we're going to start to see food shortages. And it's not just from the destruction of the environment that is causing these food shortages, but as we've seen recently, spikes in the prices of fossil fuels. And this is literally due to the embargo that's on Russia right now. The price of fossil fuels has gone up, and therefore the price of fossil fuel derived inputs have gone up. And now that's why our food prices are going up, and they're going to continue to go up because the price of fossil fuels is still high, and the food output has not quite caught up with that yet. There's a time lag between the price of fertilizers and the price of food. So eventually we're going to find ourselves in a situation, and a UN policymaker said about 5 to 10 years ago, with 60 years on average left of topsoil on this planet, it's going to be difficult or impossible to grow food in most of the soil on this planet. And that's a situation that, would be utterly apocalyptic. So I'm in a presentation right now, Jackson. Thank you, Jackson. Can you please go into I love you very much. Okay. That was my son. All right. So on that note, I'm going to check the chat and answer questions, comments. Yeah. Yeah. Surprise visitor. Am I right? Jackson's, he's great. And, he's all about this kind of stuff too. I've been teaching him about food cultivation and about soil and stuff from day one, and aquaponics too. But yeah, so let's continue then. So we're going to talk about how we've internalized all this now in our own gardens. And if we do go past 5:30, 6 o'clock, feel free to leave. And once again, I'm going to post this up. But otherwise we'll keep going. I tend to be a little bit, I tend to ramble a little bit. But no worries, we're going to keep going. Yeah, our entire economy is based off of consumption, right? Because that's what's good for the system. And we don't need to necessarily get into economics right now, but that's why this consumer form of gardening has become prevalent, and it's all based in fossil fuels. So when we take a look at these three products that we're told we all need, we're told we need packaged fertilizers or our plants are not going to grow. We are told we need these bagged amendments or the soil is never going to produce and it's going to stay rock hard and barren, right? I'm sure all of you guys have heard these things. And we're told that we need all these pesticides and even the organic, naturally derived, biologically based, plant-based, all those what are really buzzwords. We're told we need these things to deal with the weeds and the pests, quote unquote, air quotes, to otherwise our crops are going to get ravaged by them and we won't, get a harvest. And I'll tell you right now, we need none of these things. We don't need to spend a single cent on these products if we're employing regenerative systems. These products are completely useless, and I've had to learn this for myself. But they're ultimately useless. All of these things, you can either make or achieve the same results with using life processes, and we'll talk about what those life processes are. But we're told we need these things. That's the thing, because our system of agriculture is based on these inputs that are derived from fossil fuels, and therefore that trickles down to our system of gardening. Ultimately, it's the agricultural industry that creates and perpetuates the narrative, because the agricultural industry has very close ties with academia, and it's academia putting out all the fertilizer recommendations, all the amendment recommendations, all the pesticide recommendations. And I can tell you this as a master gardener, this is the stuff that is being actively perpetuated, and these are all fossil agriculture products too, because they're made using natural gas, plastic, and diesel, right? And so they do contribute to the destruction of our planet and the desecration of our ecosystems, right? And this is, we really don't want to have to rely on these, right? And yeah, growing food even organically is a great thing to do, but we don't need these products, because, and I'm going to say yeah, we all have to start somewhere, right? This is what is recommended. There's no shame in having started out doing this and using these products, or if you're continuing to use them now, that's why I want to teach you guys this information and then give you guys this information. And at the very least in this info session, sort of give you a sense of direction on what to look into, where to go, and sort of what information you're going to need if you don't want to take the course. But the course is going to make it easy for you. It's going to be the complete package of how to do this with vegetables. And so that's the thing. It is not hard at all to ditch these inputs. It is not hard at all to ditch these products. And it's still surprising me. I think to myself sometimes, oh my God, I can't believe how easy it was to, not to run a zero input garden. I had no idea. It's crazy. All the things that we need to do this, are all around us. Everything that we need to, and I've even found ways to collect invasive species and use their plant material that makes up their bodies to make fertilizers and stuff. And it's so easy to do this. It's so simple, and it's cheap too. It's dirt cheap. I can guarantee you that if you do take the course, you're going to spend more money on the course than you're going to spend on inputs for your garden if you follow these techniques. I guarantee.
Can they hear me? Am I muted?
You are not muted. No.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
It's all good. Yeah, I definitely would appreciate it if y'all would mute for now. But once we get to the questions sections, which is right now, you can unmute and ask questions. I'm sure y'all have known this, but especially for, the broader audience who may be watching when I post up the recording to Instagram, a lot of this is not common knowledge. Like a lot of people may not know that like cornfields out in Iowa or Nebraska or wherever are essentially being fertilized with cleaner. Like that's not common knowledge because we're not taught these things. It's more convenient for the establishment for these things to be swept under the rug and for us to not know about them. Oh yeah, fava beans. I love fava beans, and like that's what I'm going to say. Like I will say this right now. Like fava beans are one of the best like winter crops for our climate because they're a legume, and because they produce a bunch, and they produce a lot of like living plant material, and like. Whenever you grow like living plant material, that becomes food for your system. That's how regenerative gardening works. So we're going to talk about this now, these life processes. And yes, that is also like what I say. Eddie, is it Eddie? Edie? I apologize. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. But yeah, like that's what I tell people. Diversity is the best pest control. And like I don't spray pesticides. I employ diversity. Like I never have to spray pesticides. And like exactly, like all these sprays, like all these sprays. I've not tried eating the leaves, but I still have some fava beans going right now, so I might try it. I think I've heard that they're edible. But yeah, like that's fantastic information. Thank you so much. So yeah, like it does require a bit of a shift in our mindset to understand like what life processes are and how to like emulate them. Because this is the term life processes, comes is a term used by people in syntropic agriculture, and I derive like a lot of what I do from syntropic agriculture, right? So I really like the term life processes because it very succinctly describes like how life manages matter and energy, and that's really what we're concerned with as regenerative gardeners. We're concerned with encouraging life because life efficiently and effectively manages matter and energy. That's it. That's regenerative gardening. And like it starts with, shifting our perspective. And like, of course, the indigenous perspective, like indigenous people know this, they live this, this is like that perspective, the perspective that we are creatures of the earth, right? We are children of Mother Earth, right? And like, we are ultimately a part of the earth and a part of the environment. And we can't like think of ourselves as something separate because the moment, we're, trying to kill pests and eradicate pests to have like a clean, beautiful garden, we're thinking of ourselves as separate. That's a mindset of domination, of oppression. We can't have that mindset going into regenerative gardening. And like, I will admit, as someone who was born and raised with that mindset, I've had to do a lot of work to unlearn it. And like the work that even I'm doing is like not done yet. Like it's honestly like, it's a process, and and like I'm sure we've all internalized that to like a certain extent, right? And there's no shame in that. It's just our situation. But like through learning and through practice and through developing that relationship with the rest of the world and life, we can begin to unlearn that tendency. And so this is how I like to define regenerative gardening. So like it's a set of food cultivation practices that seeks harmony and partnership with the processes of life and with life itself. So it recognizes our place in nature as team players rather than conquerors and collaborators instead of consumers. Because we're not going to be consumers when we're running a regenerative garden. We're collaborating. We're creating the conditions for more life, right? All we're doing is facilitating. Because like we evolved these big, strong brains that can think creatively and design. That's an amazing evolutionary adaptation, an amazing talent that our species has. I like to say that every single species on this planet has a talent, right? Like for example, those fava beans, Edie, those fix nitrogen. That's an amazing talent. We have like what is essentially like super intelligence, right? I want to say super intelligence because I don't mean to imply we're superior to any other life form. We're certainly not. I mean, I would say that nitrogen fixing bacteria, are way more important for the ecosystem than we are. But, we certainly have this very unique talent, and we can put this talent to use in a way that serves the rest of the world of life in a very restorative and beautiful way. That's what it's really about. So I wanted to I would say these are some of the defining features of regenerative gardening. And so what we're really trying to do here is like since we are a part of nature, right? We're mimicking how nature works. I don't really want to say mimicking nature. And of course, like I could only type so many words like on the slide, but it's really, mimicking how the rest of nature works. And like, from a scientific perspective, what regenerative gardening really is when you do it right. And, that's key. When you do it right is it's agroecology. It's the science of ecology or the practice of ecology applied to agriculture. And, whether you approach it from like an academic perspective, whether you approach it from the perspective of traditional ecological knowledge, or whatever wisdom you want to derive it from, like it's ultimately all these things have value, right? So it's ecology applied to agriculture. And the other thing is it's process-based, not input-based. Again, we're working with life processes. In regenerative gardens, all the fertility is generated within the system, or most of it. What is not generated from within the system, is otherwise, imported through like management or for free. Like, the main input for regenerative gardening is plants. That's it, plants. Like, we're not concerned about applying fertilizers as much. We're not concerned with applying amendments. We're concerned about using plant life and the soil food web and the microbiome within the soil and employing that as a force to generate more life, to generate more plant life and more soil life. And, there are certain processes that occur in a natural setting. I don't even want to say natural here, but that occur in nature and that nature has developed and devised through billions of years of evolution that we can emulate in our gardens and that we can capitalize on. I don't even want to say capitalize, like all these terms like derived from our like our culture, right? It's crazy. But that we can partner with and be a part of. That's how you should really think of it. We're becoming a part of these processes as regenerative gardeners, and we're, through our own creative and deliberate action and with our own knowledge, we're enhancing how well they function. That's what we're doing. We're enhancing life processes. And so it's based in partnership and wisdom too, right? We observe and we interact. And this is something for permaculture. I will say, I did take a permaculture design course, but as I've learned, permaculture is not without its problems. There's a lot of permaculturalists have a very colonial mentality, right? But certain things within it, like there are some really, really good nuggets within it, when you look at like the design process itself. And the first principle is observing and interacting. And like, that's a principle as old as like humans itself, as old as our species itself, because that's what we evolved to do, right? Observe and interact. That's our ability. We can take a look at our situation, see how everything around us is working, and then interact with it to either gain more information or to sort of like nudge things in a certain direction towards more abundance. It's also restorative. So we're restoring and increasing soil health, biodiversity, ecological function, and carbon sequestration instead of degrading all these things, right? It's about bringing life back, not taking life away, not eradicating or controlling life. It's about encouraging it. And regenerative gardens are also resilient because once you really get a regenerative garden going, they start to act and behave as a macroorganism, as an ecosystem. And once you have an ecosystem, ecosystems are resilient because ecosystems are complex systems that are held together by relationships of mutual aid. If one element fails, there are other elements available in the system to assist to fulfill all those same functions, right? So it acts like a macroorganism. And then, of course, it's dirt cheap. We're not spending money on input, so our input costs are basically close to zero. The two main inputs are knowledge and time. That's it. You do have to be patient with it. That's the thing. And over where I work, I really only started to see results after about 9 months to a year. That's when it really started to tick. And it does take time, especially if you're starting from a situation where I am at home. It's still not quite ticking at my house because I'm essentially growing vegetables out of backfill that was, dumped onto the spot by like bulldozers and backhoes and all these big construction devices, right? So let's talk very briefly about the three main life processes that I've identified as being integral to regenerative gardening. So soil formation. Soil formation is the conversion of dirt into soil, right? And so do you guys know the difference between dirt and soil? Can anybody just like shout it out or drop it in the chat? And yeah, great suggestions, Edie. Yeah, y'all know the difference between dirt and soil, I assume. Yeah, the difference between dirt and soil is life. Soil is a living thing. It is a living ecosystem. Dirt is geology. It is rocks. That's pretty much all it is. It is sand, silt, and clays. It is minerals. So life is able to transform this mineral matrix into a living medium that supports life, that supports more life, I should say, right? That's what soil formation is. And in the process, carbon is sequestered into the soil and transformed into these compounds that we call humus, humic and fulvic acids. And this matrix, humus, causes the soil to behave in a very special way. It causes it to behave like a sponge. It causes it to retain nutrients in a form that are easily available to plants and other soil organisms. And it essentially begins to develop into the perfect medium for supporting even more life. The other important process is nutrient cycling. We oftentimes call these nutrient cycling processes biogeochemical processes. So I'm sure you've heard of the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the water cycle. All the elements around us in the periodic table that life uses are nutrients, right? We don't just think of NPK as regenerative gardeners. We're thinking about oxygen, hydrogen, carbon. Water's a nutrient, right? H2O. It contains hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen are more abundant in plant tissues than nitrogen, which is, what we're all told is the most important nutrient for plants. And that's because, of course, our system of agriculture and gardening is consumerist and input-based, right? We're not taking a step back and looking at the whole picture. That's what we got to do as regenerative gardeners. So these nutrient cycling processes bind nutrients into living systems from non-living systems. So the process of fixing nutrients is taking nutrients from a non-living system and sequestering it or binding it into a living system. And once you have those nutrients into a living system, they can be continually cycled and moved and reused by that living system. It's like a constant process of cycling and recapturing, a constant process of growth and decay, a constant process of life and death. That's what nutrient cycling is. And then biodiversity. And so this is exactly what you were talking about, Edie. So nature gets better at regulating the undesirables as the number of functional relationship between living things in our garden increases, as we develop that resilience, right? Because even those pests and even those diseases and even those weeds, they all have parts to play. And as regenerative gardeners, we have to recognize that. We have to understand what they're doing. I'm actually going to be doing a segment in the second section of this course on reading the weeds and what that can tell you about your soil. Because I do that all the time. Whenever I'm at a new site, I'm going to be looking at what weeds are growing there, because those weeds have something to say about the condition of the soil. But yeah, so it's all this course is all about breaking down how these processes work. And then and I'm going to talk about various techniques that you can use to manage and encourage these processes. So we'll be talking about things like cover crops, sheet composting, green manure systems, preparing indigenous microorganisms, all that good stuff, and how to design your garden around these things. Like regenerative garden design is another topic we'll be covering in the first session. And it's I'll be pulling some stuff from permaculture there, because again, there are some really great things to glean from it. But shifting our mindset once again away from sort of where permaculture came from and into us coming in from a very humble perspective as facilitators, right? And not as trying to force things, because a lot of permaculture people do that. But at the end of the day, what you're going to know how to do is not use inputs. You're going to know how to not rely on consumerism at all to grow food. That's it. And yeah, you can do this in the ground. You can do this in raised beds. You can do this in containers. McKenna, my partner, can tell you, we're running regenerative containers at her house. And I got to tell you, that salad mix looks so damn good. Really stoked for it. And the main fertilizer that, we're using is worm castings made from kitchen scraps. That's it. And the rest of it is just following the principles of regenerative gardening that will allow us to encourage these life processes, right? So I just want to go over what I've gotten out of it. So this lettuce right here, we actually got 2 crops out of this bed recently over at my work. And I don't know. I feel like I did get nursery transplants for these. So the first ones I started from seed and hydroponics. I do like to start seeds and hydroponics using the organic inputs. I'm trying to move away from that, but it's really just because I can't be there to water all the time. And hydroponics is a great way to like set up a self-watering system. But there are other ways to do it, of course. I think the best way to do it if you're running a regenerative garden either is direct sowing or soil blocks. But even when I bought like transplants from a local nursery that were like juiced up with the synthetic fertilizers, plop them right in and they grow like weeds. It's ridiculous, honestly. But it took time to get to that point. It took feedback from regenerative systems. And what I mean by feedback is the system feeding itself. So cherry tomatoes, cherry tomatoes are amazing because like, especially when you have a regenerative system, they'll grow like weeds. They'll set seed and they'll become the weeds. And like, I believe in their native habitat, they honestly, like, they actually serve the role of weeds, because what weeds do again is regenerate the soil. They address the issues that exist in that soil and work to correct them. But you'll end up with a situation where your cherry tomatoes, or even just any tomato in general, I'd say as long as it has like decent genetics, is going to be self-seeding every single year. And another one that I like to talk about is sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes. I amended with free compost from the city on that site. I did toss in a little bit of gypsum, but I will tell you it was not necessary at all. And those things grew like, oh my gosh, they grew. I could not believe it. And I ended up getting a really nice crop at the end of it. And I only put 2 plants in and I got like, I don't know, was it like 5-10 pounds off of 2 plants? It was pretty damn good, considering the situation. And like, especially considering starting out, I couldn't even get a shovel through the soil. The shovel would bounce right off. And even if the soil was wet after like a heavy rain event, it would go down maybe like that, like less than an inch. Pretty incredible, and that's the thing. Like sunchokes are another one of those crops that, we'll talk about why sunchokes are great at restoring and remediating degraded soil, because they are. So we'll talk about the course format now really quick. I can see a bunch of chat popping up, things in the chat popping up. Oh, which variety of lettuce is that? I think that was red sales, actually. That was one of the ones that I did from seed. I think when I did them from seed that season, it was red sales and Muir or Summer Crisp. Yeah, they were also basically growing in full shade. That's the other thing. Like, I was shocked. I'm like, how is this happening? How does lettuce look that good? And like when it was only receiving dappled sunlight throughout the day, and for the most part, maybe like 2 hours of dappled sunlight and then full shade. Like, I was shocked. Like, I'm still shocked by the results of all this sometimes. But yeah, so we'll talk about the course now, and how it's going to work. And yeah, and thank you for dropping that link, Edie. I still need to get you the Claytonia seeds. I've not forgotten about you. Things have just been busy. So yeah, like, that's ultimately what this course is about, is like, making regenerative gardening education accessible. And, like, we need to practice these things widely ultimately. And like vegetables, I feel are a good starting point. And yeah, ultimately we do need to be moving towards like more native food systems. We need to be planting oak trees so that we can make acorns a staple crop again, or hazelnuts if that's the native tree crop in your area. Like, but we can certainly start here, right? And like, this is what people, oftentimes are like familiar with and used to eating. And like, I feel that, starting with vegetables for many people is a good entry point into like understanding the agroecology and what that really is. And then eventually, like, yeah, you can start integrating more native plants and native crops. And then we'll talk about ones that I've worked with in a vegetable gardening situation and like, where they can kind of fit in, because they certainly can. But, like, ultimately, like, we need to transform our food system, right? Into a system that is not reliant on extraction and fossil fuels and destruction of the environment. We need to restore our environment. We need to restore our soils, and we need to sequester carbon. And like, that's the thing. Regenerative food production practices sequester crazy amounts of carbon. Like, we could offset all of our greenhouse gas emissions this way if all of the world's farms suddenly went regenerative, even like using simple practices like, agroforestry and cover crops and holistic plant and holistic management, even things like that I would say are honestly, way far away from what we really should be doing, which is again, moving back to more native food systems. But even that, like we could do so much. And there's a great white paper on that that talked about that was published by the Rodale Institute. I don't remember the name, but if I'm going to name drop the Rodale Institute on regenerative agriculture and soil carbon solution. It's like 40 pages or something like that. And it's designed, it's kind of like, the IPCC assessment reports where it's like the target audience is like, policymakers and business people and farmers, but it's pretty digestible, I'd say, for gardeners too. So I'd highly recommend looking at that. And we live in dark times, and so like I want to recommend you read that, because when you look at this, even just like seeing sort of like how like existing practices and paradigms, when transfigured to a regenerative like mode of management, right, can have so much of an impact. Imagine what we could do, like if we're going even further, right? So we're living in dark times, and I feel like when you see that we can sequester like 150% of the carbon per year that our society is generating, that gives us hope, right? And of course, like a lot of these courses, like I'll do some name drops, like permaculture design course, those are at least $1,000. Like the cheapest one that I've certified that I've seen is online and $800. That is a fortune. That is not accessible, right? Like I'm charging $15 minimum per class here, $15 minimum, right? And even that, like I would do it for free, but at the end of the day, like, as an educator, I have to make sure that I have a livelihood too, right? But, I want to make sure that it's way more accessible than that. Because that's not fair to people, who are working class and can't afford that, and can't afford to get these certifications and take these courses to create like a better livelihood for themselves. That's not fair. Like, Elaine Ingham Soil Food Web School, and like, don't get me wrong, like Dr. Elaine Ingham has made so many advancements through her work, but in like understanding how soil actually functions. But $5,000, that's crazy. Like, who can afford that unless like, you have a cushy salary job, or like, are using daddy's credit card. Let's be honest. Like, and even me, I will say, like, I come from a more privileged situation. I had money saved up and I was able to pay for my PDC myself because I saved money. Most people can't save that kind of money. So like, let's make it cheap. Let's make it accessible, and it's sort of like going to be like, it's sort of going to be like a sliding scale. Like it starts at $15. How it's going to work is so 5 2-hour long online classes, and they're all going to build off of each other, and you can take them in series or you can take them by themselves. If you just want to learn about soil, there's going to be a class for soil. If you just want to learn about companion planting and polyculture design, there's going to be a class for that. If you just want to learn about managing pests and weeds, there's going to be a class for that. So you can kind of like pick and choose which class you're going to take, right? So it's all going to be over Zoom too. And, roughly a week and a half is going to be the time frame for the first class. So just, I'm going to announce it within the next day or two. I still need to figure out an exact day and exact time. And I know Nicholas is doing his classes again, Nicholas Hummingbird, and I do not want to date stomp him. So I want to find a time that works. And then, of course, I'll announce the classes on the Instagram feed. We'll do the flyers and put it up on my story so you guys know what's going on. And if you're not sure when the next class is happening, you really want to take it, just hit me up. And I appreciate your guys' feedback. I'm going to try and make it work with everybody's schedule as best as I can. I am a busy guy. I work. I have a son. But I do have flexibility in the evenings. We're going to be shooting for around 5:30 to be like the start time for the classes. And each class is going to be 6 parts. So sort of like like I'm going to be talking for a bit, and we'll stop and discuss, ask questions, answer questions, or if you just need like any general gardening advice, I'm always happy to offer general gardening advice. I want you to be successful in your garden, because like if you're not successful in your garden, then you won't feel empowered in gardening. And at that point, like, you're not going to feel hopeful about the future, right? Or as hopeful at least. And so, yeah, like, price once again, and I'm going to post signups. And so I'll just have you like give me your email and just your pronouns and then like your preferred name and all that stuff. And just maybe a few basic questions about like your gardening experience, like short, like very, very short survey, just so that I can get an idea of like who my audience is, what their experience level is, and then like sort of what it is you're looking to get, out of the class. Because I want these classes to be sort of like a process you feel like you're really participating in, and that, is tailored to you and your needs. So I don't want it to be just like me talking at you for 2 hours. That's not really productive, is it? I mean, at least, not as productive as it could be. And then you'll be getting the Zoom link via email. And if you can't take all the classes, it's all good. I'm going to be offering them on an ongoing basis. We'll repeat every once in a while, and you'll be able to take them again. So here are the topics. So first week, we're going to focus on design. And it's really going to be about like, it's going to be more gardening in general, kind of to like, what elements are there to a garden, like garden beds, composting systems, tool sheds. I'll give you recommendations on tools that I like because I really like my sayings. I'm a saying person, all right? I like my adages. And like one of my favorite adages is don't invest in inputs, invest in tools. And so I'll teach you like what tools are very useful and share with you what tools I find are really useful for like a regenerative gardening situation. I'll talk about that and like where to place things, what makes the most sense, like, how to design for your environment. We'll be talking a bit about some of the permaculture strategies for that, because I do find that they're very useful. Then we'll be talking about soil. So we'll be talking about how to build soil for basically free or almost free, like for either like $10 worth of seeds or like, no money at all. and that is soil actually that I built that. That was built with a sheet compost and that cost me no money. So then we'll be talking about sort of like how to plant, how to plant seeds, how to transplant, crop selection, that kind of stuff. And then designing edible ecosystems is going to be all about polycultures, all about creating, these assemblages of plants that function like an ecosystem, because that is a topic that I feel is very poorly understood. And, is sort of based along the lines of like, this is how things are done and conventional wisdom, and not really like an understanding of how like ecosystems actually design themselves and how they actually evolve and how like, you can achieve function by planting certain things in certain places in a certain way. Because, as I like to say, another one of my adages, nature is not random. Nature is not chaotic. There is a logic to it. There's order to it. And once you can see and like understand that order, companion planting starts to make a lot of sense. And then part 5 is going to be integrated pest management, which I have, rebranded as partnering with life. Creating a healthy ecosystem, creating a healthy environment, where no one organism can get out of control and destabilize the system, right? That's what it's going to be all about. And, I'll be talking about some of the same topics in all of these courses, just for people who like may join one class, but not the other. Because again, it's going to be flexible for you all. I want it to be so that you don't feel like you have to take all the classes, because you certainly don't, you just want to learn about soil, come to the soil class. If you just want to learn about partnering with life, come to the partnering with life class. That's how it's going to work. But if you take all of them, they will build off of each other. And like, I would say it's going to make the most sense if you take them all. But, once again, not to worry, I'll be offering them again in the future. And here's a list of free resources. I would highly encourage you to screenshot this slide because, all this stuff is great. And I do like the free permaculture thing. And because like, again, that's another project to make, this sort of permaculture deal accessible, because the whole PDC model is awful and, elitist and, inaccessible. So the people who are making that information accessible are doing great work, and that's them. So my YouTube channel, I have some videos on my channel, Rodale Institute once again. The USDA Soil Biology Primer talks a bit about the soil food web. It's a great blurb to read on the USDA website. You can Google all these things and it'll come up, Dr. Lane Ingham, once again, expensive certification course, but, she has some great lectures. And she really goes into depth about like soil and how that works. And she's a great speaker and is really good at breaking it down. Sarah, great website, lots of free publications, especially if you're interested in like cover crops and stuff like that, and like IPM or whatever. No Till Growers is a good channel. Andrew Millison is a educator with Oregon State University, who makes a lot of permaculture type content. He makes these beautiful short videos where he draws on like this transparent whiteboard, and makes these beautiful drawings explaining like how permaculture design works. And again, we'll be using talking about some permaculture stuff in here, but I don't advocate for permaculture specifically. Agroforestry Academy, if you're interested in tree crops, these guys have some of the best content around. Their free course is awesome. I highly recommend looking into this course. And a lot of the stuff that you'll learn in my class about companion planting, you can learn from them. So just so you know, and syntropic farming in general, I would look into that. I do like syntropic farming a lot. It's sort of like, a more, it is a very like scientific approach, but it's also very philosophical. The guy who synthesized, I want to say, syntropic agriculture, Ernst Getsch, he is a very philosophical person, and like he says that ecosystems are based off of like cooperation and unconditional love. It's good stuff. But it works, and like a lot of the strategies that they use in syntropic farming work really well. So it's if you want like a visual of how it works, syntropic farming is good for that. But yeah, thank you so much. That concludes the info session. So I'll be announcing the first session soon once again. If you have questions, feel free to drop them now. I'll go through and answer questions at the moment, or you can DM me. Yeah, thank you very much.